That's great.
All right, I guess we're all set.
Okay, we'll call the City of Olivet Planning and Community Design Commission for June 3rd, 2021 to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Rob Jurgel,
Present.
Carol Wagner,
Present.
Absent.
Carlos, we can't hear Jody.
I went off. Tim Spiegelglass,
Absent.
Rob, you want us to start from the beginning again? Is that your intention?
No. I just couldn't hear you guys. Did you guys finish?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so in attendance, just so everybody, in case it didn't come through in the recording, Carol Wagner, Jody Rich, Richard Brophy, and myself, and Brian Lewis and Tim Spiegelglass are absent. Let it also be known that City Council person Missy Waldman is in attendance, as well as Carlos Trejo, the Olivet Director of Planning and Community Development, Don Doty, Senior Planner, Bridget Waters, Administrative Assistant, as well as Mr. Bruce McGregor, Olivet Public Works Director. Okay, well, I'm excited to start this new transition with the council, or most of the people on the council in attendance besides me. I'm absent, or not absent, but I'm calling in via Zoom. But it's a good step in the right direction. I feel like. Just so everybody knows, we still are doing this kind of via Zoom. We get better and better, but we still always have a little hangup, so bear with us, especially as we go through this new transition with trying to make sure we get the microphones all set and zooming in on the council members who might be talking, at particular times. We'll have a time for public comments, and those can be related to anything that's maybe not on the agenda. If you have something that's on the agenda, we ask you that you please wait until that item is brought up, and there'll be a time that we will ask for your comments. If you have any public comments now, go ahead and please raise your hand. We will ask you that you state your name and address for the record, as well as keep your time down to no more than 3 minutes to respect everybody's time and to make sure we get everybody's opinions heard. Carlos, did I miss anything?
No, sir. I think you covered it all.
Okay, good. So I think we'll move on. Let me kind of flying a little blind here, so I apologize. Let's move on to, I guess, well, Carlos, do we have any public comments?
No, sir.
Okay, good. We'll have time for public comments at the end too. So if you do have something, just, be patient. We'll start off with old business. Item A, this is a text amendment for Chapter 422, Stormwater Management, Article 4, review and approval of Section 428.080, Single Family Residence Development. The petition type is a text amendment. And Carlos, you just I lost my. I'll let you go ahead, Carlos.
Okay. Sorry about that. You were.
No worries.
All right. So this item has been discussed by the commission in the past couple of meetings. It was in regards to with the development of Birdie Lane. MSD is involved in the reviewing process, and because of the acreage of the development area for Birdie Lane, they're going to have to meet MSD's stormwater quality and detention requirements on the site. In the plans that have been submitted for review, they indicate that the building footprints, the driveways, the driveway turnarounds, patios, the sidewalk, and the street, including the cul-de-sac, are being calculated in the MSD calculations, and that their detention, the proposed detention that's being proposed for the subdivision as a whole is accommodating that 15-year, 20-minute storm based on that square footage. They inquired that Chapter 422 regarding the construction of a new single-family home, which 8 new homes will be built on the site, requires that a individual lot has its own detention for the house square footage be provided on that. And question became is that we're kind of double dipping. We're asking the developer to provide individual lot on-site detention, while MSD is asking the developer to provide on-site detention for the subdivision as a whole in there. So in this case, the building footprints are getting counted twice, one by the city, one by MSD. So we've had discussions about amending Chapter 422 that if there is a new subdivision, they can petition to have only one applied to the subdivision, and odds are MSD will have the jurisdiction, and that they can be the individual lots for the new construction can be exempted from providing their own on-lot site detention or stormwater detention. We discussed this at our last meeting. There was some concerns that were expressed by the commission. They're kind of summarized or expressed in that report. And there was the types of questions were twofold. One is MSD and whether the calculations that are being used both by the city and by MSD, are they really the exact same thing? So therefore, is it true that we're kind of double counting the square footage of each lot and providing on-site, an oversized on-site detention system, both for the development? And then secondly, there's concerns about the stormwater and the grading in there and how that impacts the surrounding areas. And they're really two distinct things. Chapter 422 was initially drafted as a means or a mechanism to try to provide on-site detention for infill housing, because in many cases, we don't know what the history was or whether there was any calculations or any detention put in place for a subdivision. So this kind of helps us in a process because most of our housing stock was built prior to 1970. MSD came in probably in the late to mid 60s, and prior it was a different jurisdictions or communities that provided their own detention systems, if there were any. So we put that in place as a purpose is to address an unknown with specifically individual infill housing, because we didn't have the ability to take a broader look of how the impact is to the subdivision as a whole or the neighborhood or so. So this was our best bet. And again, it was solely written specifically for the infill house. However, when you have a subdivision, you know, that is taking a more holistic view and a broader view of the subdivision as a whole. And of course, the detention systems are being provided. And it kind of negates the need to have the individual on-lot detention systems to an extent. On the other end, you know, we have a stormwater issue that's because of grading, whether it's infill, existing, or even new subdivisions. Grading is the next thing that we're trying to tackle, and hopefully in the stormwater management plan we'll have a better direction or feed to it. But we do review grading at various levels of a new home petition or even an addition. The review process for grading of a lot or of subdivision, that is not proposed to be changed in any way in this amendment. The only thing that's being changed in the amendment is the requirement of having a new lot provide the same detention system that an infill lot would. That's not coordinated or part of a broader detention basin. And that's the goal. However, we understand that the concern that the commission has, that it's really that stormwater runoff off grade, and how do we ensure that the grading conditions that are approved, whether in the preliminary plat or the subdivision improvement plans, are maintained over time. And that becomes enforcement, it's code enforcement, and that's difficult in a community of our size with limited manpower to try to continue to oversee. We do have processes in place to provide that checks and balance. One, of course, if you're doing an infill lot, you have to go through and provide all the contour and grading data that you would for the new home. If you're doing a substantial addition, you have to provide that same mechanisms. And then as the improvements get smaller and smaller, it becomes harder and harder to even get to, you know, a property owner, you know, covering up a swell to build a vegetable garden and not having an idea what they were doing. So one of the thoughts is again, how do we maintain that, ensure that that swell or the systems of swells that are used to provide the broader detention systems in the subdivision are maintained over time. And that's difficult. We'll have a couple of thoughts or suggestions to discuss, but those were the questions that we kind of put forth to the petitioners whose engineers are in attendance here to kind of talk about that. Again, I hope I summarized the commission's comments in the report. These were forwarded to the petitioner. We had a discussion, and they're going to talk about MSD, the calculation methods, the averages, the various questions that were brought up at the last meeting, and then we'll talk about that above ground grading. I know Mr. Spiegelglass had a concern on that aspect. I did talk to him today in there, and I'll relay what his thoughts were to that as we continue. But at this point, again, I'd like to introduce the petitioners to discuss those two categories, MSD and the calculations, and then the above ground grading. Chairman, I'd be glad to answer any commission questions first on that.
I don't have any questions. Does anybody else on the commission have any?
None for me.
Seeing none, Carlos, I think let's go ahead and bring them on. Carlos, are you muted now?
Yeah, I think the timer on these things has changed over time. I'll have to check with share. Again, bear with me here. Okay, so I am promoting Brian Jokerst and Mike Bordering. Again, they're part of the developers team representing the engineering aspects for the subdivision. Brian and Mike, if you can kind of identify yourselves, and if you could, we'd like to have the, of course, the mics on and the videos available.
Hi, Commissioners. I'm Brian Jokers with Elite Development, representing Freeman Homes and the Birdie Lane subdivision. And I have with me Mike Birding with Sterling Engineering. He's the civil engineer on the project as well. So I'll kind of let him touch base and discuss the MSD calculations a little further.
Hi, I'm Mike Birding. I'm the vice president at the Sterling Company and a professional engineer. But to give a sort of a brief overview what we do for MSD, as part of the development, we look at the entire site, and we have to prove the MSD in means of swales and piping and stormwater inlets, and show them that we can get the entire site handled so that we have no increase in runoff for a 2-year and 100-year storm. And that's a 24-hour storm that we do. In that detention analysis, all of our storm piping leading to that is designed for a 15-year, 20-minute storm. And the volume in that basin is such that it accommodates a 15-year, 20-minute stormwater event very, very well. I mean, a 100-year 24-hour produces such a large detention basin that you could probably store a couple of 15-year storms in that same basin. But that being said, we have a volume reducing element to it, also with the bioretention in the bottom of the detention basin, and so it does a very good job of detaining very strong storms, and then also trying to reduce the volume, and that's just current regulations from EPA that, you know, we're meeting the minimum control measures. But with regard to the swales and the piping, it is a system, and when we were talking to Carlos about how we could assure that those swales stay in place, you know, there is a mechanism that we could do it through the indentures, subdivision indentures. And MSD's had us do that on a couple of tracks before, and actually suggested it on this one too. And that gives the city and the trustees of the subdivision the right to go in there and open a swale back up if somebody, you know, somebody puts in a pool, blocks the swale, and that happens all the time. And the mechanism to open it up again has to be there so that the swale can be maintained and you don't pond water on the neighbor. So the methodologies we could do is do that, or even provide an easement over the swale. That some municipalities have done that. And there, you know, it's not saying that somebody's going to go in there and purposely do something. It's generally somebody that doesn't know that that swale has to stay, and with an easement or with subdivision indentures, at least gives the city and MSD the right to go back in there and open it up if it's causing somebody an issue. But what I wanted to say also with regard to the individual lots, you know, there's no guarantee that those are going to be maintained, and you know, so the you know, it's a good mechanism for infill tear down rebuilds on houses, but in this case where you have a larger subdivision and you could, you know, you're accommodating all those same issues you're trying to mitigate with individual detention on each lot. I don't know if you have any questions or if I confused everybody, but
No, I think that was great. I think that was a very good explanation. And, you know, I think some of the concerns that were expressed by, you know, Commissioner Spiegelglass was, you know, kind of the concerns of adjacent neighbors, you know, if having the runoff from one house impact the other house. So at least I know that's what his Carlos, am I correct? That's what his concern was?
Yes, that was one of the items was about the maintaining those swells throughout a prolonged period of time, you know, beyond that. The other item was regarding MSD and those calculations and how those are set, and based on our last discussion, that they're based on an average size of a home footprint driveway turnaround. And one of the questions from the commission at the last meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, was what about if a house comes in and exceeds that average? Secondly, what about 5 years from now, a house comes in and adds on an addition? Again, the text amendment here would not change the requirements for any future additions or extensions or flat surface work that's currently required under Chapter 422. So we have a new home and 3 years from now, they decide to add another garage or place an addition or place a pool, they will still be subject to chapter 422. And if their square footages exceed a certain standard, they will still have to provide their own on-site detention for that increment. So again, I don't think that anything, there wouldn't be any negative impact to what would happen down the road to an existing home. The only issue would be, again, if the calculations are based on an average size for each individual home, these 8 individual lots, and one of those houses, when it comes in for community design review, and exceeds this average, one is, how do we know, and what do we do about that increment?
Mr. Chairman, this is Richard. Do you mind if I ask a question or two?
Actually, Richard, before we go into that, I'd like to find out how those calculations are based on, what average impervious area and roof, as well as driveway and roof area, if that's okay, Richard.
Please.
Brian, can you answer that, or can Mike answer that?
Mike, would you like to elaborate on that? On how the roof, driveways, and pavement and everything are actually calculated?
Yeah, I was actually just taking a look at my sheet here. And actually might have grabbed the wrong sheet, but I have to verify the square footage of the home. But we took one of their larger homes and then actually put a side turnaround on each one. And I believe we're showing a 30-foot turnaround pad and then driveway out to the roadway. And then along with that, we're showing I think it's a 12 by 12 patio and then a sidewalk and porch in the front. And then the sidewalk and the street of the subdivisions included in that also. But we have a proposed impervious area of just over 3 acres. And
Mike, is there a way that you could provide us those square footages for each individual home? I know you took an average, but if you can give us what the roof area is, what the driveway area is, what the patio area is, just so we can use that as a comparison when the new homes come in.
yeah, I can send a breakdown to Carlos in the morning if that would suffice. But
I think that'd be great.
yeah, and like I said, it's not unlike what we do in all the developments for MSD. In knowing that the site has larger homes with the side entry, usually we don't get a lot of side entry pads, and that adds a lot of impervious area. But that is included in our detention calcs and what's developing the water to the detention basins. And the thing is with the individual downspouts being caught in, it's getting directed to the detention basins, via the pipes and the swales and actually, and what's coming off the front yard goes in the driveways, go out to the street, and then goes to the gutter, which goes right back to the detention basin. So it's all accommodated for. But yeah, I'll send Carlos that plot plan with
Very
the
good.
square footages on it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear Richard's questions.
Yeah, that's good. Richard?
Thanks. Yeah, just a couple. Number one, there was a mention by the petitioner of relying on indentures as a mechanism for enforcing the establishment and maintenance of the swales. Do they have a vision for how exactly that's going to be executed and how the city is involved in that, as opposed to it being a private only solution?
I think I can touch on that. The indentures will actually be recorded with the final plat for the subdivision. And MSD's they've actually said they're going to require a certain text in the indentures that I think it actually states that in order for a homeowner to make any improvements or do any alterations to that swale, it has to be approved by the homeowners association, the city, and MSD for them to even, if they would want to actually modify that swale. So it would kind of give a little surety on any changes to that grading and swale back there.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess one thing we would want to see is the proposed language so we can review that ourselves and approve it.
Sure. I can actually send that to, actually, I think I did send that to Carlos yesterday.
Another question, if I could just bang through these quickly. Another one, I noticed that Mr. Boarding was referencing some house plans. Are the houses and the designs of those houses already established for each of the properties in this new subdivision, or is there going to be the possibility that so the new buyer is going to be able to modify or design their own?
Yeah. At the time of putting together the improvement plans, we don't have the exact finalized house footprint for each of those, and that's kind of why I think in this subdivision, I think he's going to offer 3 different models, I believe. So we kind of took maybe the largest one that he had, or the average, and because that's all we could go on at that point. We didn't have the finalized house plans for each house at that point.
Sure, understood. Okay, the next question, is there a way, I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I'd like to just confirm this. There's a way for the builder to identify the delta between the average house size used by MSD for these calculations and the house impact for the individual house that's going to be built. In other words, you could send us a delta showing how much additional impervious square footage was being presented for a particular house to be built as compared to the MSD average. Is that right?
Yes, I think we could do that. Mike, do you agree with that? We know what the square footage we show currently on plans, and then
Right.
once the actual house is picked for that lot, we could figure that difference.
Yes.
Okay. So then one thing that I'm cogitating over here is if I mean, in my personal view, I think there is no need for water retention if the subdivision as a whole is going to be designed with a certain amount of water retention built in. However, if an individual house is larger than the average, that additional impervious square footage wouldn't be designed for. And I'm imagining a world in which perhaps we require that there be on-site retention for that amount of impervious area that goes above and beyond the average that MSD anticipated. Do you have any reaction to that?
I guess I do. The average, I guess, is, it's really sort of maybe a bad description of what it's all about, because the tension is so over sized. I mean, it's really designed for a very large storm. We're talking about, and when I say large storm, 7.2 inches of rainfall over a 24-hour period, and we're collecting that in this basin versus like 3 inches of rain in 20 minutes. I mean, that's a pretty intense storm, but all the storm sewers are designed to handle that. And it's not an exact science, and that's why average is thrown out there a lot. It really is an average size, but it's a large average size. And the idea that, okay, somebody adds, another 50 square feet, when they come in for a plot plan review, those swales and those storm pipes are more than adequate to handle that, variance in impervious area. That it's not like you're talking about the difference between a residential site and a commercial parking lot that's completely paved, that those are two extremes, but it's um, the type of variance that we're talking about is just fractions of percentage impervious.
Would you be able to supply us with some numerical evidence that demonstrates how much more capable the subdivision's water retention would be than an individual design
Yeah, we could,
require? I think that would give everyone here some comfort, but
Yeah.
just using, hyperbole isn't going to do it. I think we need to see some actual numbers to understand.
yeah, and just to give you an idea that one of the things we always check and MSD has us look at is a 100-year storm, 100 or 20-minute storm in a rear yard swale, so they want to make sure that the stormwater, if you exceed that 15-year 20-minute storm, that it actually makes it to the basin, and that overland flow doesn't end up in somebody's house. And we don't want that either, but that's part of the design review that MSD does along with sizing it.
So I guess this is my last question / comment, but I think something that would be helpful for us to see is some numerical representation of the kinds of variances we would expect in impervious area for different plans. So for example, a case study involving 3 different designs of a type that are expected to go on this property that
Okay,
that exceed the average in some way, and then a way, and you're better suited than I am to understand what might be the most persuasive way to demonstrate this, but something demonstrating that even with those modifications, the amount of water that's retained is above and beyond the standards that we would require for a typical infill housing project.
okay.
And Richard, something to think about too. You know, regarding the delta, we could compare that delta to what a normal addition would be. So if it's only over by, let's say, 50 square feet, that wouldn't require necessarily a stormwater detention plan. But it may require, some best management practices or BMPs.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think some numbers that really paint a picture of how effective the MSD stormwater retention requirements are would
Okay.
give me at least some solace that, 50 square feet here or there isn't gonna be an issue.
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Carol.
I'm trying to envision as we go down the road, say with the subdivision, I think, is there a way we could project like how large an addition or impervious surface on a lot could be increased before we have to start getting concerned about them needing additional measures? I'm trying to get some feel for 5 or 10 years from now, if somebody comes in and wants an addition, or 3 of them want additions. Is that then a problem? Or if we triple the size of the home, or are they all still within the initial calculations? How much leeway would we have in?
Under, just Chairman, if I can answer that, because
Yeah,
again,
go
I
ahead.
want to be clear that under the proposed text amendment, this only applies to the house at the time that it's being built. Any addition from that point on, or after that occupancy has been issued or final, is going to be subject to Chapter 422, and they may have to provide their own on-site detention system, just like a neighboring house off of White Rose or Planters would. So again, anything that happens in the future, they're still subject to the current conditions of the ordinance, even though that the subdivision has its own on-site detention system. That exemption won't apply to the addition or expansion of improvements. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
It's, get ahead along.
Did somebody have a question? I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, I will when everyone else on the commission is done.
Okay, I have another quick question, and it's the downspouts. You mentioned the downspouts in the front would be directed kind of towards the street. The downspouts in the rear, are those going to just flow, kind of with splash pads, right below, or are you going to pipe those to the rear of the swale?
Well, that's really a home builder choice. There's no requirement to pipe it all the way to the swale. Some people like that, but splash pad running overland, that's really kind of the desired approach MSD likes to take, just because that flow across that grass to that swale helps reduce the volume and really kind of slows that stormwater down.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks. Any other questions or comments on the commission? Missy, you had a question?
Yes, I do, sir. Thank you very much. Obviously, we've had this discussion on indentures. And
I couldn't hear that complete question.
okay, now it's working again. All right.
Good,
just
good.
Technology there. So Mr. Brophy asked my indenture question, and I still have more questions after the answer to the indenture question. All right? Because what I heard is not what I hear when I bring up the question of the indenture question. Recognizing a subdivision's indenture, complying with it, and saying, oh, this is a legal document, when I've heard the opposite already. We can't be involved in the enforcement of your indenture. So that question and the concerns with regard to this development in the subdivision and the future trustees is my question that staff needs to clarify a bit further. It's my thought.
No, it's a very good question. And if we can't have any enforcement over that, I would say that, having an easement in the backyard would be a good mechanism for that.
And if I may, this is Richard again. I think it'd be wise for us to have the city attorney take a look at that and determine whether there's language that can be put into that indenture that would trigger enforcement capabilities from us. But I think another issue to grapple with is, that's fine for purposes of this development and this change of language. But what happens when another development comes in? I think we need to have language in the revision here that requires submission of an indenture adequate to allow us power to control it if they're going to make use of this exception. In other words, we've just elicited agreement with this builder that they're going to submit indentures, but nothing in this modification to the language of our statutes would require the future builders to do that. So they could make use of this subdivision exception without complying with or submitting an indenture. Am I articulating that clearly enough? So we need to put something in the language here to make sure that one of the requirements for making use of this exception is the submission of an easement or an adequate indenture that's approved by the city before this exception can be applied to that subdivision project.
And Richard, one other thing too, I would push more for the easement, because the subdivision can always change those indentures without, involvement from us.
Yep.
Okay.
I have a
Good.
quick question for Mike. I guess you said that you've seen both easements and indentures used to enforce the swales, for instance. And I was just wondering,
We
I
lost,
didn't hear the question.
yeah.
Okay, you should be good.
Carol, can you try repeating the question? We can't hear it. Bear with us, everybody.
There we go.
I'm back for a moment anyway.
Good, good.
We're having technical difficulties. So I forgot the question. Okay, I got it. So is there what are the pros and cons, I guess, of using an indenture or an easement from your experience?
Well, an indenture is, it's rules of the subdivision and it gives the power of certain acts to the the board or even, like the trustees, however it's set up, then they're all different. And most municipalities will review those indentures. But with regard to an easement, you would set the easement up not as a general utility easement, but as an actual drainage easement, which would be recorded right on the record plat, because we know the location of it based on the design. So that drainage swale easement, that's a drainage easement. I mean, it's a very specific purpose then, and I think that overall, that probably more direct, and the record plat is very hard to remove and change that. You could change an easement, but the overall purpose of it being there and being necessary for drainage is a very purposeful. I just it's there's procedures that you can go through to vacate an easement, but it comes back to the individual property owner can't do it on their own without somebody knowing it. That ends up being one of those things that are dedicated to the city and to MSD and to the specific purpose of drainage. And so MSD and the city would have to be on board with the redesign of relocating a swale or something before it could actually be vacated.
Thank you. That's a good explanation.
I do think it'd be helpful to get Paul Martin's input on this, so we have a crystal clear understanding of the mechanism by which this would work, not just for this process and this subdivision, but in the future as well.
Agreed. Okay. Carlos, is there anything else that you want to go over? Otherwise, I think we about hit on everything.
No, I think that kind of covered the scope of the commission's inquiries from our last meeting. And there we have a better direction. It sounds like a positive direction. I'll reach out to Mr. Martin. Our next meeting will be on the 17th, I believe. So we'll get coordinated on that. And of course, petitioner is looking forward to getting some action on there. And if we can get that set, we'll do so. Mike or Brian, when do you anticipate the final plat being submitted?
I know we have a draft copy of that, so I would think we could be submitting that here in the next couple weeks. for your review.
Because at least to start taking into consideration that identifying the average square footages that were used on the final subdivision plat as a note, and also looking at providing the easements on the swells, I think would address some of the comments I've heard tonight. Part of the final plat process is they also will be submitting their draft indentures for review. So if it is possible to get that process started for our next meeting, then I'll have the city attorney here, and that would kind of help expedite it or keep things moving.
Yeah, I know I could probably, I know the indentures are still in the process of being prepared, which those probably won't be ready for some time yet, but I know I could actually get the record plat submitted to you probably next week, actually, because I know it's prepared. It's just in a draft stage, but we could probably get that finalized and submit it for your review at least early next week.
One other item, just in the interest of moving things along, if there is easement language you'd like us to consider, if we're going to have the city attorney here, having both options, indenture and easement, in front of us would be a way to keep the process moving most effectively.
Okay. Yeah, I at least have an excerpt from a previous indenture that MSD required that we can provide.
Great. Yeah, the more information we can have for that next meeting, the better.
I think by law, MSD has a particular language that they are providing, you know, and I'm not sure, but I thought that when I was doing some research, but I sure like the thought of the easements and other actions, because, you know, my city tells me the largest subdivision in the county, you know, sorry, and I'm hearing different kinds of conversations here.
Just to make clear, though, those are the differences from 1960 and what ordinance and regulations were in place with the city at that time to today. And while I understand the thought process on that, you are correct in there, but that's why we've come a long way. Also. So,
Okay, so I think we should go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. Would that be okay with everybody, unless there's any other questions or comments?
None for me.
all right. Mr. Jokers, Mr. Bordering, thank you, sir. Gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Commissioner Chairman. Thank you.
Gentlemen,
Okay,
bear with me 1 second. Let me move them over.
no worries. I have my agenda brought up, so if you don't necessarily have to pull that up, if you want to just go right to your report. But I'll introduce it when you're ready.
Right. Just want to make sure I don't lose anybody. All right. Okay, so we're set for the next item.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, new business, and then we'll talk about item A. This is 1191 North Price Road, the Public Works Salt and Bin Yard. Petition type is community design review for a 2,400 square foot public salt storage enclosure. Petitioners, the City of Olivet, property owner, City of Olivet. Carlos.
All right, Chairman, I'm going to have Mr. Bruce McGregor. He's our Public Works Director. And Bruce, just so he's aware, they have copies of the staff report and then the council agenda submission from the previous meeting. In there, if there's anything else that the commission would like to see, just let me know. Yes, I'm going to.
Perfect.
I'm going to.
And I think I have one now, so this one. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Nice to see you in person back in the community center again. If we haven't met before, I'm Bruce McGregor. I'm the Public Works Director. I've worked for the city for about 12 years and reside across from that beautiful lot with the blue tarp on top of all the salt. We've been debating for years about how to meet our responsibility with MSD to properly enclose salt, protect the environment, how to properly provide a safe working environment for our staff members who come in frequently in the middle of the night on very cold, foul weather and have to climb on top of that pile and drag tires off and move the tarp around, and there's holes up there, and we've been very fortunate to this date that we haven't had an injury. We've gone through a number of iterations of design, trying to be mindful of our place in the community. Unfortunately, we have to live within a budget, and we are not able to present as wonderful as a structure as I would like, but a more utilitarian structure that is probably aptly designed to store salt, which is really what this is about. It is a partnership project, meaning that the city is going to put in a lot of sweat equity and management as opposed to a turnkey project. We're doing this to preserve a budget and try to maintain funds to do other projects like street repairs and so on, instead of doing turnkey. Procedurally, the city will provide the site work and the preparation. We will contract out the concrete slab. We will supply the concrete blocks. And by procurement, we've selected AB Construction to set the blocks and install the superstructure, which is outlined in our bid document. The PDF that was presented to council and is now shared with you includes links to our invitation to bid and other items that were presented to us as supporting compliance with our document. For instance, we strictly wanted a hot dipped galvanized process for our materials. And you can say you want hot dipped, but what happens is some manufacturers look at hot dipping it is one thing, and then cutting it up, rewelding it, putting it back together still meets that requirement. The reality is the minute you weld or cut, you present an exposed edge of steel. And it is our goal to have a long-term structure for it to support the canvas, the fabric. So the manufacturer, the A&B Construction uses, meets our warranty requirements, and they follow a process of manufacturing and then dipping the structural components in the galvanization, providing us the coverage we need. Now, this doesn't mean that we can bury something in salt. We still have to protect the structure, which is why it's elevated on blocks, and make sure that we're doing our part on that. The fabric is also fire retardant and in a higher quality than normal, trying to make sure that we get a good lifespan out of the finished product. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the process, about salt, snow removal, winter operations, public works, or anything else. Well, yes, I may be able to retire after this is done.
Does any commission members have any questions?
So this is an industrial area, so there's no residential units that are really looking at the site or anything that
we have traffic that passes through,
Mhm.
but I don't think that while on the east side we approach the residential, the public works building is a buffer, but clearly everything to the north and to the west is industrial, light industrial. Okay. Is it the ideal fit? No, but we have to be realistic with our expectations. We are placing the structure as far to the back as we possibly can. Okay. And we want to make our utilization of that space more of a benefit for maybe public works and parks department to store on. We don't know what else is going to happen in the northeast quadrant. Our staff parking lot is currently on Alice. We don't know what's going to come. We have so much interest in the area. I'm sort of want to make sure that we have space over here that might need to accommodate future use. Should something be presented that really meets the city's interest, that the parcel that we use for bulk storage now is a long-term benefit for the community. Okay. So it is a little bit, tricky. We have a sanitary sewer that bisects the property as well. During our first survey that was done in 2014, that was not identified by MSD or anybody. And we just happened to walk out one day and see an MSD crew out with a camera truck doing inspections and asked, "What you doing over there?" And they identified a sewer bisecting, which is shown on the site plan. So that sort of forced us to realign where we were going to place the structure versus trying to relocate a sewer. I'll also just note on the plans, that was a very preliminary site plan. We have not updated it yet, and it reflects a 40 by 60 layout. We've gone with 40 by 80, which is in the council memo. We needed to talk to these suppliers about the actual capacity of the structure. There's an angle of repose with salt, and make sure there was sufficient working room to close the door. And based on their experience, they do this nationally. They said you could probably get it in there, but you'd be piling all the way up to the top of the block. You'd be pushing it up against the steel components. And if you get a bigger load than you expect, we sometimes get more with our deliveries. You'd be sort of backing yourself into a corner. So adding that extra 20 feet gives us room to maneuver equipment and not overstress the structure. Excuse me.
Bruce, I had a question. The existing fencing that's around the pile now, is that temporary fencing?
That will remain in place. We
Have you,
replaced that in 2016, 17.
have you guys considered putting in some more solid type fencing?
We could certainly add slats to it. I am hope if you look in the photo on the screen now, that's what it looked like before. We added the fence, and we did upgrade to a powder coated fence, the black fencing, trying to at least present a little bit of an improvement than the galvanized. And we did the I forgot how the selvage is, what they call it at the top, where it's twisted, or it's rolled, not. Anyway, we can certainly look into that and find out how to, what the impact might be with that and how we might make it better. We did do that around the staff lot on Alice to make it look a little bit better as well. So absolutely can consider that.
And I had a quick question. Carlos, can you pull up the proposed views? This is just my personal preference, but the top picture looks a little bit nicer and cleaner than the bottom picture.
We bid the project with two tones. And that has been a discussion. These are examples of existing structures, nothing that we are, hard and, nothing we're attached to. So I would value the input from commissioners on whether there's a vertical line, horizontal line, whether it's better to have white on top and tan on the bottom. I would value everybody's opinion. The only recommendation we've heard from the manufacturer is the lighter colors are better because they don't absorb the UV, which degrades the fabric. So going to an olivette green might not be our best recommendation. Sticking with tan and white or a taupe type color is better for the longevity.
And a tighter, I think too, like a tighter wrap. The picture on the bottom, it looks like a looser fabric that's has.
I hadn't noticed that. That's a great observation.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I
Yeah.
agree. I think the top picture is better. Perhaps one of the reasons is the concrete wall is flat. It's not jagged. And also the top comes down and conforms to the top, the top fabric portion conforms to the concrete in a way that doesn't in the lower one. So I think the more that we can head towards the top design for particularly those two reasons.
And a couple other things to note on there. The lower one has 4+ courses of block and the upper one has 3. We are going with 3 courses. And I don't know, I'll have to review the bonnet detail because different manufacturers sit differently on top of the block. Some sit in the middle and some sit on the outside edge. So I'll have to look at their structural detail and see if that almost like a tapered or canted, can be obtained. I don't know.
It also looks like the blocks on the top have kind of
Reveal.
an edge to it. I guess that gives it a little bit more of a castle-like appearance.
Part of the issue with the blocks, and this really dives into the details, but not all blocks are made the same. And there is a variance And when you take up 80 feet and you're talking about a variance of 3/4 of an inch or an inch per block, and you're trying to square a structure, all of a sudden you're left with a gap. So, you know, going with manufacturers that provide the most consistent block makes a big difference in your labor, your manpower. I think everybody knows if you start with an unlevel foundation, you're fighting it all the way up through the kitchen cabinets and the medicine cabinet and the doors. So, you know, we want to make sure that we're using a manufacturer that has the most consistent. And we've already gone through the process of vetting some manufacturers.
Good, good. Any other questions or comments from the commission members?
If I could just ask a question that realistically, I think these two pictures is really of one structure that is larger than the other structure, and that's a visual difference as well.
Sure, two different manufacturers. When we wrote our invitation to bid, we gave a size scale. You know, I forget what I put in there, 38 to 52 feet and 60 to 70, some range in there, because I didn't want to limit this to only one manufacturer who happened to have the correct metric or module. You know, we wanted to make this, you know, available to multiple bidders. It turned out our warranty requirements were so strict, we really limited who could submit on the project. So the upper structure is 54 by 54. The lower structure is actually 40 by 80, and that happens to be the one in Overland. So if you drive down Page and you're familiar where the Overland Public Works facility is, it's up on a hill tucked adjacent to the records archive, the Navy, military, I forget who it is. Anyway, it's up on the hill there. Now that you're driving up and down Page, you'll probably always be drawn to look at the fabric structure there, but that's where it is. If anybody wanted to see it, I'm sure I could arrange a tour.
Any other questions or comments? Any other further discussion? So do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve a 2,400 square foot salt enclosure to be located at 1191 North Price Road, as noted in the staff memorandum dated June 3rd, 2021, subject to any additional conditions or amendments as approved by the commission.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second.
Motion's been made by Richard Brophy and seconded by Carol Wagner. Carlos, will you please call the roll call vote?
Commissioner Rich,
Approved.
Commissioner Brophy,
Approved.
Commissioner Wagner,
Yes.
Commissioner Jurgo.
Approved.
Motion passes unanimously 4-0.
Thank you very much. It was really nice seeing everybody this evening.
Thanks for your help.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks.
It's good to see you.
Congratulations, Bruce.
Still got to get a permit.
Okay, Carlos, is it okay if I introduce the next one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll move on to item B of new business, which is 20 Hillendale Lane. Petition type is a site plan review for a fence variation to allow structure posts to face away from the interior. Petitioner is Missy Fish, property owner is Missy Fish. Carlos?
Her nickname is Missy. All right, Chairman, bear with me 1 second, and I do have the property owner in here, but I'm going to transfer him after going through a quick introduction. We received a permit. It was just recently in a couple of weeks, and it's for just 15 feet of linear fencing adjacent to a patio off a, I don't believe it's a walkout, but a first floor walkout in there. And we considered the 15 linear wall a fence because it meets the definition of a fence. And when they put the fence code together in 1995, you know, they really didn't define what the spirit and intent or the purpose and intent of the code was. But what they did in that was that they called out fences and only fences, and authorized that fences would be exempt from the traditional zoning setbacks and would be permitted to be placed all the way up to a property line under the conditions that, one, If it's a front yard fence, it has to meet the ornamental decorative requirements for a front yard fence, and that's limited to 36 inches in height, and has to be transparent. And for a backyard fence, again, to qualify for the zoning exemptions, to be able to put this along the property lines, a rear yard or side yard fence can be fully opaque, can't exceed 6 feet in height. And then finally, the structural posts have to face the interior portion of the property that's being enclosed. Those exemptions were granted because, again, a fence was allowed to be placed on or all the way up to a property line, unlike any other structure, whether it be a driveway, patio, or a house, or so. So in this case, when the petitioner applied, and again, they're seeking to put 15 feet of fence along their backdoor patio, in there, the plans that are identified showed that the wooden posts of that fencing would be facing towards the neighbor. And we had the discussion, and they requested to submit an appeal to the commission with sole purposes is that they weren't seeking to benefit from the exemptions that were allowed for fencing to be all the way up to a property line, that this was within the interior of their property. And then the petitioner will talk about some of the topography and landscaping that they have on their property. But I just wanted to go back because that again, I think the fence code is pretty good, but it fails to identify what the purpose of intent was at the time of adoption. And I believe in its spirit, this is just making an assumption from a planner's perspective, was that the goal was to provide exemptions to fencing so it could be placed on the property line subject to those conditions that are outlined. And again, so the structural posts face the interior, so the neighbor would have the cleaner, smoother side in there, as opposed to that. But that code does not state that specifically, but it does provide the process for variations through the commission, and that's what we'll kind of discuss through that today. I'll be glad to answer any specific questions. You do have the packet of information. I believe it identifies the placement and location of the fencing, and I do have the property owner on here. But Chairman, first, if there's any specific questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Are there any pictures of the proposed fence? I'm going through the report and I don't see it.
Outside of the verbal information on the contract, this is where the fence location would be, but not within the contract. All it notes is the notations that you see here.
Okay.
So, and I'm not sure the petitioner may be able to provide something or not. But again, traditionally, this is what we would receive with the permit application.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a quick question?
Oh, please.
Carlos, one of the oddities about this, in my view, doesn't have anything to do with the way in which the fence is facing. It has more to do with the fact that they're installing a 6-foot fence on top of a large retaining wall. And this is not, I think, perhaps the proper candidate to take up this issue, but I'm curious. Let's say in my backyard, I wanted something taller than a 6-foot fence. Could I put in a 3-foot retaining wall and then put a 6-foot fence on top of it and therefore get a 9-foot fence? And what is your reaction to that?
It's an excellent question and one we've been struggling with, but haven't had the opportunity to amend the ordinance to put some clarification. When the inspectors take a look at it, if there is an existing retaining wall on the property grounds, if the pole is solely within the higher side of the retaining wall, we do the measurement from that point there. If the posts were on the outer end of the retaining wall, which is very rare, especially you have a tie retaining wall, because those measurements would be taken from that lower part of the retaining wall. And it's one that there really hasn't been any clear guidance. The past practice has been so long as the posts lie within, you know, they're not sitting on top of the concrete of the retaining wall, they're indented right next to the block on upward, we would measure from that point there. Is that what you were?
Yeah, it seems like an issue, just in general. I guess it's one of those situations where you know when someone's playing a game when you see it, presumably. And I don't think that's what's happening here. It's just, it poses an interesting question, because if you're standing down where that garden hose retention cabin is, you know, that's going to be a 12-foot fence, not a 6-foot fence.
Correct.
Sort of. The other question I had, if I may, is you mentioned at the beginning that this proposed construction constitutes a fence under our guidelines. What causes it to be considered a fence as opposed to some ornamental wall or something like that?
Because if it was an ornamental wall, it would be integrated into the wall, the wall of the home, and more than just an attachment. We would be looking at that there's that it's secure from any shear movement or anything like that. So it won't be that they just kind of connect the post to it and then that's it. There would be a little bit more to make sure that it had a proper footing to avoid any shifting over time. And in this case, that's not what's being proposed. The fence will be tucked up against the wall, but it's not connected or fully attached to the wall. They may pin it to the wall, but not.
One of the reasons I asked that, sorry, pardon me for dominating this conversation so far, but one of the reasons I asked that is that the conditions under which we're permitted to grant a variance require an imposition of unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty. And I think it may be difficult for us to demonstrate that that's satisfied here. Personally, I have no problem with what they're trying to do, but as far as setting a standard for how we assess variances going forward, in a situation where perhaps there needs to be more scrutiny, I think we need to be consistent, and I'm not sure that we can do something here without compromising our ability to perhaps say no in the future when it's a different scenario. And for that reason, my very last question, and I'll be quiet, is would it be possible for them to avoid this issue by simply manufacturing a double-sided fence with cedar on both sides, or a shadow box where it's, you know, offset cedar, and then this isn't an issue because they would have the fence would have two front faces rather than a front and a back.
That is correct. Yes, that's one of the options they can take a look into. But to go back to your first question, because it's one we struggled for some time in there, and we've had discussions that, and again, this is making assumptions that the council made a deliberate decision to provide the variation process through the Planning and Community Design Commission, and that unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty is based on our site plan review process and the standards of what, you know, to make sure that there are no adverse impacts within the interior of the lot or against its adjacent neighbors. If the council's intent was to have the literal interpretation, then the variation process should have been given to the Board of Adjustment, where that is a more formal requirement of that hardship. So I've always looked at it that, given that the process that was dictated, you know, that was provided by the council was to provide that a little bit more flexibility as opposed to what a Board of Adjustment would have. And that's what they've done in the past. Not saying that it's right or so, but that's been the process that the commission's kind of followed in the past.
And just to complete that makes sense to me. I'm just concerned that the same language is here.
Correct.
And so, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And if the Board of Adjustment is applying this language, we need to be applying it in a way that's consistent.
1995, I believe. And bear with me, I just noticed that I had,
1995, I wasn't even involved.
that was Mr. Lisher's amendment.
Was this the one that won the home rule award way back when?
I'm not sure. That's not what I'm aware of.
We're having a hard time hearing Missy, by the way. or I am.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My question was, should the council be going back and looking at this with regards to some, I thought this was something we did recently. Carlos said it was 1995. So I want to know whether perhaps this is something that needs to come back to council. Because it's always when something begins, there's this aha moment. And obviously 95 to 5 to 15 to, almost 30 years later, and we're having an aha moment.
Well,
And that was the question on my part.
And it is, but when we look at the pressing priorities that we're trying to address right now, that it doesn't rise to that level to.
That's a fair answer. I just gotta ask the question.
Yeah, and again, the commission has granted several variations, especially along the street side, to those conditions. But over time, again, you're right, they do set precedents, and people keep on asking as they keep seeing them. So.
Would it be
Any
possible-
other questions or comments from the commission members?
I just wonder whether the petitioners here, we could hear from them on fence design.
Chairman, may I?
Go, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, Ms. Fish, I'm going to promote you to a panelist, and we ask if you can turn on your audio and video. That would be greatly appreciated, and then introduce yourself.
Carlos, I'm not sure if she's been brought on.
Okay, well, I'm unmuted, but for some reason it's not allowing me to share my screen.
Oh, you sharing your screen, yeah, that I'll have to provide you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So Missy Fish, while Carlos is doing what he's doing, my recollection of my beginning days, was your house not the house that won a Homer Award or some level of an award after you built this home?
Not that I'm aware of. It was a house that caused a lot of controversy because I wanted to build it,
Okay.
but I'm not aware of having won an award, but that would be lovely.
Different kind of award.
When was it built?
In 2002, 2003.
Okay.
And there was a lot of controversy because I was the first newer home in this, in Hillendale.
See, Missy Fish, I am remembering you. I am so remembering you in this house.
Well, good. It's a great house, I have to tell you.
It
I'm gonna turn on-
You gave me a
There
tour.
you
It
can
was
see
a-
better.
it was a hard time for you.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a big controversy. Hopefully my fence will not be as big of a controversy.
So can you describe the fence and,
Well,
what your options are?
yeah, Chesterfield Fence is building it. It is replacing what used to be arborvitaes there that all died and looked terrible and had a hard time maintaining them because of how they were positioned. So I pulled out the arborvitaes, and the plan is to put up a fence. And to address one concern about the fence being so tall, something has to be there or I will lose people off that wall. There has to be some sort of barrier there because that's a major drop off. So that's why I am proposing the fence, since the arborvitaes were not very successful in that space. And it is a very simple, horizontal, clean fence. It has 3 upright posts. Maybe one of them could be seen from the street, maybe. And so I guess I felt like it would be like not a problem to request that they be put on the outside, since I'm, really no one will see this. It's set into the very middle of my property. So it won't be visual to really anyone except for me. And obviously I would like to look at a finished fence as opposed to kind of the more unfinished fence with a post on the interior. It's
Any
made out of
commission?
eastern cedar, and it is 6 feet high, it's 6 feet tall and 15 feet wide.
Good. Thank you. Any commission members have any specific questions?
This is Richard again. If I may, Ms. Fish, First I'll say this, from my perspective, this isn't a big deal, and I wish you well with your fence design. The unfortunate truth is that you're stuck in a little bit of a whirlwind of circumstance here where the rights that we might have to adjust may become an issue. So one question that's born from that is, would you be willing to consider just putting a double-sided fence in to address this issue?
I really don't want to. I mean, I really want a horizontal fence. They're more current. They're, you know, a lot of people are using them. That was my vision from the beginning. And that's what Chesterfield Fences it has quoted. And I also already have concrete poured with holes in it because I didn't realize I needed a permit for this little bitty fence. So the concrete's all poured and ready to go. And so I would really prefer not to do that.
So, and this is just a quick follow-up. So this is going to be a horizontal slat fence.
Yes.
Is it your understanding that you couldn't do slats on both sides based on the way they're planning to build it?
Well, I could if I wanted to double the price.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from the commission members? Carlos, do we have any public comments, just to make sure?
No, nobody's on.
Good, good, good. Well, thank you, Ms. Fish. We appreciate your time. And
Chairman,
yeah, go ahead, Karen.
I just want to confirm something so that you don't have any neighbors to the rear or to the sides then?
I have no neighbors to the rear. It's just the creek flows back there and then it's a wooded hill. And then to the side, I have, there is a property to the east of me that has a bridge that goes into their property. The Martins, Hiram and Cheryl Martin, I can't remember what number that is, Hillendale. So they have a bridge that crosses the creek. And like you can, let's see, you can kind of, the bridge, it's right here. Well, wait a minute, no. Interestingly enough, their bridge has slats that face me. It's finished on the inside. I don't think my 3 slats would be particularly offensive since I'm looking at their slats.
Carlos, if you could scroll down, I think it shows that bridge in one of the previous drawings or photos. Maybe it was further up.
Yeah, you could barely see it. Here's the bridge right here.
In the back behind the trees.
Yes,
Right.
there
Yeah,
you go. Yep.
All right.
And then the following photo shows, I took a shot from the street so that you could see, like if you can scroll on down to the next photo. Okay, keep going. Yeah, no, one more, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is standing in the street, looking back at my house, and you can see that little yellow arrow. That is the very edge of that wall. That's all you can see from the street. So there might be one post that might be visible from the street.
Good, good. How far of a distance roughly? I mean, that looks like a couple hundred, maybe 150 yards.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay,
And if you
great.
go any further west, you lose sight of the wall altogether.
Great. Personally, we're going to have some discussion with commission members right now, but I personally don't have a big issue with this. And I'm not sure if there's any further discussion amongst the commission members there at the City Hall.
Mr. Chairman, if I may be annoying one more moment. I agree with you. I have zero problem with this. The concern that I have is with the strictures within which we're operating. We don't have an articulation from the petitioner as to why the variation is required, what the practical difficulty or hardship is. As noted in the packet that we have, a motion should be made in the affirmative to grant the variance as requested and should note the hardship or practical difficulty found necessary to grant the variance. What are we going to articulate? Is that practical difficulty or hardship? I just, that's the problem I'm having, is that the process that we're required to follow here doesn't make it easy for us to approve what I think we all want to approve. And I just want to make sure that we don't get tripped up in doing something here because it looks fine to us. And in doing so, perhaps bastardize a process that we'll be concerned with in the future. That's my concern, not with Ms. Fish's application or what she's trying to do, which I think is perfectly acceptable, frankly.
It might be, I'm gonna throw out a stretch, but there might be some practical difficulties with trying to finish the fence, being that it's up on top of a retaining wall.
Like a safety concern.
Yes, yes.
The other thought I had is that the way the language is written is that there's an unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty consistent with, among other things, the aesthetic objectives of the sections at issue. We could take the position that given the weighing of neighbor versus petitioner aesthetic requirements here, it benefits the petitioner more to have the fence facing her patio than it harms the community given the location of the fence.
Oh, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I like that. Does any other commission members have any thoughts? That being said, if we don't have any more,
I think Carol has one more comment.
oh, good.
I struggle with this in the same way that Richard is, for many of the same reasons, I'm afraid. I'm just wondering if the petitioner can add some insights to this, so it would help us define the hardship or the practical difficulty.
Well, I don't remember on the application there being any, I wasn't aware that that was a requirement, that I had to come up with a hardship or practical difficulty. My thought process was, I mean, there's no question that something needs to be there or it's dangerous on my patio. And aesthetically, it is much more pleasing. It will be much more pleasing to me if I don't have to look at those, and my guest, if I don't have to look at those posts. I had no idea that there were so many ways of looking at this. But again, you can barely, I'm not sure that anyone will even see a single post from the street. So it seems as if it shouldn't be a hardship to anybody for me to have these 3 posts on the outside of the fence.
I don't know that most of us disagree with you at all. That where we're stumbling is on how to meet the language of what we are required to meet in order to grant approval, and that's where we're struggling.
Carol, if you don't mind, I think Ms. Fish is probably unaware of, the variance language that we have to deal with. I think she was referring to, her application for the permit as opposed to the variance request. So Ms. Fish, do you understand kind of, since it is a variance request, that that's what to issue that variance, to not have these, the slats face the outside, we need to be able to show that there's some hardship or practical difficulties associated with that.
I understand that now. I did not when and for me now, there's a practical difficulty in that if the fence is changed, I'm gonna have to pull out probably $3,000 worth of concrete work.
Was there a permit for that concrete work?
I didn't know I needed one.
As a realtor, and I know you have an oath and ethical requirements, that's a pretty high retaining wall without a guard. And it looks like there's, you know, I caution on that, you know, I went out of the way to try to expedite this for you. With the understanding, I mean, I know Chesterfield Fence and I know on their contracts, it notes that you have to check, it's your responsibility. And you
Yes.
as a trustee representative of Hillendale, and you've been honest about different properties on Hillendale, especially the neighbor across the street with the pool and the conditions of those fences. So I know you're very aware of our fence requirements and conditions. Now, you and I did not get the opportunity to sit down and talk about the variation process because I tried to expedite this on your behalf because you work closely with us through
Right.
the years that I've been here in there. But I do want to caution on that because and maybe I'm mistaken, had an expectation that you're very familiar with our codes because we've worked closely the past 20 years and you were here maybe 1 year before I started in there, that I kind of assumed and that was my
I've
wrong.
never worked on a variance before, so I did not, I didn't understand that that needed to be proved.
So
You know, we've talked about a lot of issues in the neighborhood, but they didn't have to do with a variance that I recall.
it's just that the go here would be because we've gone over the fence across the street that encloses the pool. The other gentleman, Mr. Voigt or Rod, and his fence extending forward, and then even a neighbor down there where we've had some property maintenance issues, actually both sides, and their fencing conditions in there. So the goal here again is just I made an assumption that you were aware of those conditions. We did talk about, you know, in that email, the pictures I think represent what she was trying to articulate as the visibility being the hardship in there. And again, we looked at it as a short segment. As the commission considers it, I think the view from staff is that those aesthetic conditions were put in place for the sole purpose to allow the fence to be up by the property line. But in this case, it's unique when you have a property owner such as Ms. Fish, who's putting up what is a short fence, but it's probably well over 20 to 30 feet from the adjacent property line. And whether those conditions should be applicable as if she was putting it right on her neighbor's property line. And I think that really is the cusp of where we're having this difficulty with this ordinance as it's currently written in there, and something we do have to take a look at. And that's why I felt that the process through the variation made more sense and try to accommodate the petition application to come in for those purposes, because it was I don't want to say it was an unnecessarily delay, but it was it's every once in a while you hit these permit conditions and say, unfortunately, the code restrains me from issuing a permit that I think, you know, seems reasonable. And sometimes that's good. But in this case, there was many things about this, the shortness of its length, the distance from a property line, and the number of posts. We're down to 3 posts that made this, you know, worth bringing it to the commission's attention sooner than later. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if I could poll the commission members, are we comfortable with identifying these this aesthetic balancing as an appropriate mechanism for getting over the variance requirement? I am personally. I think this is such a unique scenario that if we're presented with another circumstance in which a fence is in the middle of someone's yard, essentially not visible to neighbors, that then the aesthetic balance of interest shifts in favor of the homeowner rather than the neighborhood. So I'm comfortable taking that position if everyone else is. I'd just be curious to know.
I'm comfortable with it.
I think I'm comfortable with the,
Jody, I'm not sure if you answered.
sometimes I seem to be shorting out. I'm comfortable with it. I think that just the fact that this is nowhere near the lot line makes it, and it's a fence very internal to the lot itself, which makes it different than most fences that we deal with.
Agreed. Jody?
I'm good with it as well, except for, I had a question then about, there was no permit for the concrete work. Can something be done to deal with that? I mean, do we need to look at that?
It will be more an administrative process, and we'll work with Ms. Fish. I mean, she's worked or coordinated with us for years. It was just something that became apparent in there, and that new concrete work, it looked like that was once a planting bed, which then exempted the requirements for a guard being placed on top of the retaining wall. Now that that planting bed is gone, a guard or a fence is required by code. There's no, it's a public safety issue at that point.
I'm good.
Okay, so do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the petition for site plan review to authorize a fence variation at 15 Hillendale Lane to allow the construction of a fence with posts, framing, and other structural support to face the non-enclosed area as noted in the plans before the commission and is presented in the memorandum from Department of Planning and Community Development dated June 3rd, 2021, subject to any staff conditions noted therein. And further, I'll note that the reason that we're granting this variance is because there is a necessary hardship in the form of an aesthetic difference between the impact on the homeowner as compared to the neighbor. This fence is located in the middle of the property, is essentially not visible to the neighborhood, and therefore requiring the unattractive side of the fence to face the homeowner causes a harm to them that's unnecessary under the circumstances.
Motion's been made by Richard Brophy. Do I hear a second? I couldn't hear who seconded that.
I'll second.
And seconded by Carol Wagner. Carlos, you please call the vote.
Commissioner Rich,
Approved.
Commissioner Brophy,
Approved.
Commissioner Wagner,
Approved.
Chairman Dragell.
Approved.
The Chair, the permit does, the motion does pass in there. And then Ms. Fish, the inspectors do have that in their queue for review. So someone will probably get back to you early next week.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good evening.
You too.
Okay, Carlos, I think we'll move on to discussion items. I'll give you a minute. Let me know when you're ready.
Chairman, I'll ask if we can go ahead and defer the discussion regarding the CDR reviews and get
Okay,
businesses.
good. So we'll move on to other business and meeting minutes. I know 2 sets of meeting minutes were issued, one for, I believe, March 3rd and March 18th. Those were emailed out to the commission members.
They received paper copies and I emailed those to you.
Oh, good.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Ms. Wagner.
I would like to acknowledge receipt of the meeting minutes of March the 4th, 2021 and March 18th, 2021.
Thank you. So noted. We don't have to vote on that again. I always ask that, but I just want to confirm. Okay, so we'll move on to.
Sorry, is March 3rd or March 4th?
March 4th.
Okay.
Okay, good. So we'll move on to reports. Carlos?
Chairman, just a couple of updates regarding permit activity going on at this point. The Oliver, if you've seen that, the first floor is pretty well framed in, and they're putting the ceiling or what would be the flooring for the second level as that moves along. It's still on their website that they're anticipating leasing by late fall. It's a pretty tight timeline, but now as the structure is going up and in place, that's moving quickly. We haven't had any discussions, but we'll be reaching out to the developer regarding the commercial parcel and seeing what are their thoughts in that process in there. We talked internally about probably coordinating discussions with the commercial representatives for the Oliver, Plant Haven, and even Easy Storage about kind of following through on the catalyst strategy of working with them as they're starting to look at tenants in there. And of course, right now as we are kind of back into the pandemic, hopefully things are starting to evolve, and we're starting to see more interest than we were in the past. But I know, like from Plant Haven, as an update on Plant Haven, his goal is to try to secure a second tenant. The primary tenant, of course, being the permanent location for Plant Haven Gardens, but to secure a second tenant before he continues on with the construction. And he is in discussions with two various retailers for that. So we hope that would get moving. Easy Storage too, they're continuing to do, they're having discussions with the council regarding how the county is assessing the enclosed storage properties in there, and hopefully those discussions are progressing, and we hope by this fall too that they will be moving on Firestone. We're looking at a closing, should happen by mid-June or within the next week or so. I think all the issues that their concerns regarding maintenance, signage, and the improvements for the Veterans Fountain have all been addressed, and things should be a go for that. As we head out closer to the interstate at 170, the Opus Group will be presenting their master concept plan to the council at their second meeting, I believe in June, as they're preparing all their developers agreements with our city attorney. At the Olive Crossing, they will be before the council for their amended concept master plan at the second meeting in June, along with their final subdivision plat for the 6 lots that are proposed. In discussions with the petitioner, they are looking to have the residential component submitted shortly thereafter. So that'll be probably in our second meeting in July, if their schedule continues as noted. Outside of that, I don't have any other updates. Ms. Doty, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to.
I don't have anything right now.
Good. So Missy, you're up.
Great, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, commission members. I am here to officially inform you that the city council has made a decision to advertise for various openings and various boards and commissions, including the Planning and Community Design Commission, that will specifically be asking for anyone interested that is an architect. So that will be going out to the public very shortly through our communications manager, Kiana Fleming. And we shall see what transpires from there. The reason that we have to identify the architect is because of our building appeals responsibility and requirements per state statute. And it's just not worthy to have 2 separate boards. If and when, and we've been very blessed for many years, Vance Lisher and many others, and Michael Saunders, and it's time to put it out there and see what we have in our community. All right. Other than that, I really appreciate everything that you are doing. The world is opening up, and obviously we are here And so it's good to see you all. That's all I have to report. I don't know if you have any questions.
Missy, I just have one question, and that's how long will that process take? I mean, is there going to be a deadline for submitting those applications?
I don't know. I'm gonna tell you at least 30 days.
Okay,
Because I don't really know the length and that's in our requirements, but typically we would like to deal 30 days, give people the opportunity to respond and see what's happening. And then we would look over those that are filed. Typically, we do our appointments. We changed it for the second time in my career as a councilman to not make appointments again until typically the end of June. So we're in the beginning now, but I think we'll see what comes in. And I think the council will probably be making some level of a decision. And I'm speaking for myself right now, probably in July.
good.
Okay.
All right.
And Zoom will continue for you.
All right. Any other questions or comments from the commission members? Otherwise, hearing none, we'll adjourn at 8:47. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Chairman.
See you, Rob.
Thanks for everybody's patience. It was a lot of learning things. We'll figure out this. I am going to stop now. So, not yet, not yet.
As I'm watching, I'm like, oh, what is that thing?